Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. It's a special evening. It's one of our first ever in situ Zoom, not virtual, we're all real here, professorship celebrations. Thank you for allowing us to take some of your time so we can celebrate the appointment, long overdue, of Dr. Peter Scacheri to the Gertrude Donnelly Hess, MD, Professorship in Oncology Research, and Dr. Jennifer Cullen to the James T. Pardee, Carl A. Gestacker Professorship in Cancer Research. And I'm delighted that we're able to have Pete and Jenny's families joining us today. Jenny's husband, Reggie Meyer, and their son, Sam. And Pete's parents, Fran and Bob Scacheri, his wife, Cheryl, and their two children, Cameron and Chloe. Now, unfortunately, before I get to my special remarks, I don't get to be on the stage that often, so I wanted to point out that today is April 19th, so I have a little story to tell you, and then we'll get on with our program, so just bear with me. As some of you, hopefully all of you, will remember, Longfellow wrote a poem that starts on the 18th of April in 75. Hardly a man is now alive who remembers that famous day and year. He said to his friend, "If the British march by land or by sea, over the town tonight, hang a lantern aloft in the belfry arch of the North Church Tower," and on and on. And that was a poem, of course, about Paul Revere, who began his ride late at night on April 18th in Cambridge. So why in the world am I talking about this today? Well, because I grew up in Lincoln, Massachusetts, and every day when I was a kid, we would go to sleep on April 18th. My mother, who was the local newspaper reporter, would get us up around 1 a.m., and we would get into the station wagon and 5 kids and drive off to the various farms in Lincoln, the north end of town between Lexington and Concord, and we would watch the reenactment of Paul Revere's ride with horses, muskets, costumes. When we were all done, we had cider and donuts. So anybody who has to put up with me on April 19th knows that it's Patriots' Day in Massachusetts. So back to your professorships. All right, now, professorships are really quite special for an academic institution. There are professorships all over the world. They really do honor our best and brightest faculty. Thank them for the contributions they make to our academic community. Thank them for their discoveries, their passion for innovation, novel ways to look at difficult problems, their teaching, their education, their involvement throughout our university. And from the vantage point of the School of Medicine, an endowed professorship is our way of recognizing our best faculty, of supporting them in the long run, and to make lasting commitments to their productivity, their well-being, and simply their recognition. And it's pretty wonderful to be able to sign your name with that professorship underneath it. Currently, there are more than 120 endowed professorships, and more than 80 of them were actually established over the past decade during the CWRU Forward Thinking campaign. And I want to both thank the generous donors that make these professorships possible. It's remarkable how they will carry on for generations into the future. And I also want to thank Pete and Jenny for their incredible fortitude and accomplishments that led to their selection. Now, I can't tell you too much about them, although I work with them a lot, every day. But I get to turn over first to Dr. Tony Wynja Boris, who will focus on our first recipient, Pete Scacheri. Let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Wynja Boris. He is the James H. Hewell, MD, 37 Professor of Genetics and Chair of the Department of Genetics and Genome Sciences at Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine and at University Hospitals. He's a graduate of this fine school, a PhD in '84 and an MD in '87. He and I overlapped in Richard Hanson's lab during his postdoc. He's internationally recognized as a human geneticist who's made major contributions to our understanding of the pathophysiology of many childhood neurologic, neurodegenerative, and neurogenetic disorders. And he's created a number of animal models and induced pluripotent stem cells to study these. These models can be used to test novel mechanisms of the pathway, as well as come up with new therapeutics. For instance, he was the first to produce a mouse which had mutations in 3 disheveled genes, and he established that these were linked to the phenotype of autism, and used this to really study the neuropsychiatric disorder. And these mice recently have been used to uncover a novel transcriptional cascade that alters embryonic neurogenesis and may give rise to the adult behavior that we see. He's received numerous awards, including the NIH Director's Challenge and the EJLB Foundation Research Scholars Program Fellowship. In 2018, recognizing his national leadership, he was elected as president of the American Society of Human Genetics, the primary professional membership organization for human geneticists worldwide. He has also been elected to the American Society for Clinical Investigation, the Association of American Physicians, and as a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Dr. Wynja Boris, tell us about Peter.
Well, thank you, Stan, and it is really my pleasure to be able to introduce Peter Scacheri as the Gertrude Donnelly Hess, MD, Professor of Oncology Research. And I titled my brief remarks, Foundation of the Department of Genetics and Genome Sciences. So I first knew Pete from his work when he was a graduate student in Eric Hoffman's lab studying muscular dystrophy, and his work as a postdoctoral fellow in Francis Collins' lab, where he studied mouse models of hereditary cancer. But by the time I came to Case to become chair of the Department of Genetics and Genome Sciences in 2023, Peter had already established his laboratory, his independent laboratory, and was actually on the search committee for the chair. So I got to meet Pete in person at that time and discuss my ideas about the vision and get Pete's read on what he thought was important for the department. And so my thoughts initially were, in our department, we'd like to have genetics and genomics, model systems, and drug screening that we could translate from basic research into perhaps patient care. And Pete was instrumental and was really the foundation of the genetics and genomic area of that at that time. Now, I'm not going to go too far into telling you about Pete's work, but what Pete was really forward thinking in understanding the regulation of gene expression. Most of us, myself included, were studying the genes themselves, but Pete was studying the regions of the gene in between the genes that controlled the gene levels up or down, the sort of the rheostat. And Pete applied that and was a leader in recognizing that these regions outside of the gene were critical for cancer. And so now it's an area of strength in the department, with Pete leading the way as really the founding member, the foundation of this area in the department. Now we have but besides epigenetics, we have 7 research areas where we have several faculty in the department. And I want to point out that besides epigenetics, Pete is actually involved in virtually all of those areas in terms of the research that he's doing. So again, this is why Pete is a foundation for the department. Besides his own research, he's an outstanding mentor and professor. I have to point out that he's the principal investigator of our recently awarded departmental T32 training grant, which we used to have all the time, and we've only recently gotten back, and Pete was the PI, and I thank him very much for that. But besides that, I also want to point out that he was the graduate thesis advisor for Olivia Corradine, who is a Whitehead Fellow at MIT, and now she's a member of the faculty at MIT and the Whitehead Fellow. And I want to point out how remarkable this is. These are extraordinary selective positions. They're given to graduate students right out of graduate school without postdoctoral training at one of the premier institutions in the country. And she was awarded that right out of Pete's lab. And now she's going to be, again, a member of the Whitehead, to of course, to her credit, but to Pete's as well. So as I said, Pete's the foundation of the department, no question about it. And from this picture, you could see that he really is a foundation of the department. He's actually a building block for this wall that was between his and Paul's lab. I must point out that Pete is an athlete extraordinaire. He was a wrestler in college, but he's since turned his athletic prowess into cycling, where he is an outstanding cyclist. In fact, there's so many cyclists in the department that I really felt like they might not give me the job unless I got a cycle of my own. Now, I can't cycle like Pete, so I got a stationary bike so I could just do the working out at home. So they eventually let me come in. I'm nowhere near Pete, though. As you can see, companies are clamoring to advertise on Pete's jersey because of his renown, not just as a scientist, but as a bike rider. And Pete, I'm really impressed with the attorneys at law, Litzler's Automation. You really got it covered all over the place, as well as Lexus. Good for you. Besides being an athlete, he's also a trendsetter and influencer, as you can see from this remarkably stylish suit that he wore for one of our recent holiday parties. And so without any further ado, Pete, I again congratulate you on being the Gertrude Donnelly Hess MD Professor on Oncology Research, and take it away.
Wow, Tony, I'm flabbergasted. Thank you for those comments, and yeah, some embarrassing pictures there, but I appreciate it. Okay, so I have the challenge of apparently giving you my life story in about 10 minutes. So I will do my best here. Let me a moment to share my screen. Okay. All right. So what is my story? Okay. So I grew up in what most would consider an idyllic family, and it was in the small town of Dover, Delaware. I'm the third born in my family, and I grew up with two older brothers shown here, Bobby and John. And my father, he was an obstetrician gynecologist. And he delivered babies for pretty much the whole town of Dover, Delaware. And my mother, she was really the backbone of the family. I mean, she cared for us like nobody else. And the thing is, like my dad, he really valued work and also valued our family. And despite being on call and leading for the hospital at all the odd hours of the day and night, and my mom having to deal with three boys, she still managed to put supper on the table every night at 6 o'clock. And my dad managed to come home and join us every night. He prioritized dinner and family time. And my parents, I really owe a lot to, because they taught me the importance of a strong work ethic, and they instilled in me strong moral values. Also, being second generation Italians, they taught our family to really take pride in our Italian heritage, and they were constantly stressing the importance of family, which is something the motto that I live by today: importance of family. My two older brothers, they're good people. They also, though, they taught me, they helped me grow thick skin. Okay. Thick skin is required for a scientist, and they had something to do with that. So I thank them as well. Okay. Training. So I attended a small liberal arts college in a rural historical part of Pennsylvania, at Gettysburg College, and inspired by my dad, I went in as pre-med. I thought I wanted to go to medical school. Right around the time I was a junior, I was exposed to this guy, Steve James. And he was a new assistant professor at Gettysburg, fresh out of his postdoc. And he was absolutely passionate about science and deeply committed to education and training. And he took a liking to me for some reason. And I wound up doing a summer internship in his lab. And Steve he was amazing. He showed me how to use a pipette. And he got me excited about science. We would spend hours in his office talking about molecular biology and genetics and the promise of these new fields for revolutionizing medicine. And I was completely riveted. And this was the guy that really got me rethinking about my career plans and potentially pursuing a career in science. And that's where I met this guy that Tony had mentioned, Eric Hoffman. So Eric was also a Gettysburg grad. Okay, and at the time he was a pretty famous human geneticist. He was famous for discovering the gene for Duchenne muscular dystrophy and the protein product dystrophin. And Eric actually called Gettysburg looking for a technician. And so Steve and another colleague there, Ralph Cavalier, recommended me. Now Eric hired me as a technician, and this was no simple technician job where I came in and I was washing glassware. It was actually the best job in the world. I was doing diagnostics for a variety of forms of muscular dystrophy. And this is where I really cut my teeth in human genetics. Physicians and patients from around the world were sending blood samples with suspected diagnoses of various muscular dystrophies. They're sending them to me. And I would extract the DNA. I would hunt down the mutations. I would write the reports. I would interact with the physicians and their families to report back the results. It was really just an incredible learning experience and extremely valuable. And this really cemented my interest in human genetics. And I decided to pursue a PhD under Eric's tutelage at the University of Pittsburgh. I graduated in year 2000, and then I was fortunate to meet this guy, okay, our NIH director, Francis Collins. Francis, Francis is a national treasure. Okay, this is a guy who has a sincere interest in helping humanity. And I had the privilege of watching this man in action. And what I got to see was an exceptional genomicist, and also like how someone could be so good at pulling together collaborations. I mean, he was someone who taught me about the importance of being open as a scientist, how to engage others in the community and in the field to tackle some of the most challenging problems in human genetics. And doing this with this level of enthusiasm that's rarely encountered and quite infectious. One-on-one meetings with Francis were really special to me. I was working in his lab at the NIH. Science can be very frustrating. I remember I'd walk across campus to his office, often frustrated with the research and the direction and not really sure if I was going in the right direction. And I would sit down with Francis and we would meet for 20 minutes and he was just game changing. You would leave the meeting feeling reinvigorated, and I'd have a crystal clear path of what to do next. Full of excitement, full of enthusiasm, and ready to get back to the lab bench. And I've really tried to emulate this style that I learned from Francis. So in 2006, I joined the faculty at Case Western Reserve, and assistant professor. I dug out this picture from my ID. I think I look like a little kid here. But at the time, this was not too long after Francis and his team had completed the Human Genome Project. And that effort told us that of the 3 billion letters that make up the DNA alphabet, less than 2%, this tiny little sliver, codes for genes. And the rest of it was considered by many to be junk DNA. It was literally called junk DNA. And I wanted to mine this when I set up my own lab. And it turns out this junk DNA is loaded up with these elements that control all these genes and cells. Okay, Tony had mentioned these. These are called enhancer elements, and they function very much like a dimmer switch or a rheostat to control gene expression. Now, the study of these enhancer elements has been a veritable treasure trove for understanding the basis of human disease. And I love this quote from the Grateful Dead. I'm a big Grateful Dead fan. And I thought this was quite appropriate to slip a quote in. So the quote goes, "Once in a while, you get shown the light in the strangest of places if you look at it right." It's from a song called Scarlet Begonias, for those of you who know the Dead. And I've been gifted with incredible, very talented graduate students who have really looked at it right. Okay, it started way back in 2009, my first student, Mike Schnetz, okay? Mike discovered that rare diseases can be caused by mutations in genes that regulate these switches, these genetic switches. From there, I had Batul Akhtar Zaidi. Batul has showed us that alterations in the switches are really important in the development of cancer. Tony had mentioned Olivia Corradine. Olivia told us that genetic variants that lie within these switches and alter their activity can predispose to a whole host of common diseases like heart disease, diabetes, arthritis. And it's often multiple variants in these switches that collude or work together to confer the risk to these common diseases. In 2018, a super talented MD PhD student, James Morrow, came along. He told us that alterations in these switches can help cancer spread from one organ to another. And most recently, this guy, Andrew Morton, another talented graduate student, he showed us that the switches drive oncogenes on these circular DNAs that tend to be common in particularly aggressive forms of cancer, like breast cancer. Now, these are all very basic discoveries, and we've had many others. I'm just really hitting the highlights here. But I like to think that these basic discoveries and ultimately what we've done at the lab bench will be used to eventually help patients. And I want to emphasize that we're not done yet, okay? This arrow keeps going on. I'm just getting warmed up, okay? We're tackling stuff by studying this junk DNA and studying these enhancers. We're getting into territories that I never imagined we would wade into. For instance, now we have big projects on trying to uncover the basis of addiction and opioid use disorder. So stay tuned. So like my former mentors, I take mentorship very seriously. I want my students to be productive. I want to put them on a path for them to achieve their own goals. And successful mentoring of these trainees, this is among my most proudest accomplishments. I love celebrating them whenever they graduate and whenever they move to the next step in their careers. And they're all doing well, as Tony alluded to. Mike Schnetz is a practicing anesthesiologist. Gabe Zettner is an associate professor at Indiana University. Stephanie Balo is a cytogeneticist down in Cincinnati. Batula started her own company. Olivia is now a Whitehead member. And it's just remarkable to watch my trainees flourish. Again, it's one of the most exciting things to observe as a PI, success in your trainees. I want to take a moment to thank my lab technicians and informaticians shown here. And in particular, I want to thank Cindy Bartles. Okay, Cindy was my first employee, and she's been with me the entire time, the entire journey, and she makes sure our lab runs smoothly. And she has so many roles in our lab. She's the workhorse, she's the accountant, she's the organizer, she's the teacher. I could not have asked for somebody more trustworthy or dedicated to our success than Cindy, and so I'm extremely grateful for her dedication to our effort. Now, I approach science as a team sport, and I work by this and live by this Woodrow Wilson quote, which I know Francis recites frequently, so I couldn't resist. And the quote goes, "I not only use all the brains I have, but all that I can borrow." And I'd like to first, mention Tony. I mean, Tony has been an outstanding chair. I feel very grateful that Tony sees the value in what I'm doing. I'm excited about the new colleagues that the department has recruited. I'm excited that there's so many people focused on human disease research, and they're excited about making a difference in the lives of the public. Special thanks to these folks shown here, who are close collaborators, who I've borrowed a lot of their brains from. And I want to take a moment to thank my close friend and colleague, Paul Tisar. Paul and I are like, we work together. We do everything together. Our students, in fact, refer to us as P squared. And the fun thing about working with Paul is it's this magical space where it's not competitive between us, okay? But we bring out the best in each other. We're constantly raising the bar for one another and making sure the science is done very rigorously and to the best of both of our abilities. And so I've been really fortunate to have met Paul and worked with him on this journey. And lastly, and perhaps most importantly, I have to thank my family, my two kids, Cameron and Chloe, and my wife, Cheryl. Cheryl, you've been with me on this from the very beginning. I mean, when I was first in Eric Hoffman's lab, and I was doing diagnostics, Cheryl handed me a specimen for a suspected case of myotonic dystrophy, and that was all it took. I mean, I think I was in love instantly. She's my soulmate. We've been on this together the whole way. She's shared in every success that I've had, and she's shared in every failure. She's provided all of the emotional support, and there's no way I could have done this without her. I mean, she's from the graduate students, from being a graduate student to a postdoc to moving a case, every grant submission, every manuscript submission, every student I've helped. Cheryl's been aware of it, and she's been there for me the whole time. And for that, I'll be forever grateful. So I'm going to stop there. And I can't see who else is on this call, but I'm sure you're out there. And thank you for attending this this celebration with me. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Peter. That was both heartfelt, incredibly exciting, and fascinating to hear. Congratulations again. It's been a remarkable start to your career, and we agree with you. We're looking for a threefold or a fourfold duration as in your professorial position and as a member of the case community. So I'd now like to move our program to honor the professorship of Dr. Jennifer Cullen. And to do so, I will introduce Dr. Jonathan Haynes, who is the Mary W. Sheldon, MD, Professor of Genomic Sciences and Chair of the Department of Population and Quantitative Health Sciences at Case Western Reserve University. And he's the founding director of the Cleveland Institute for Computational Biology. Dr. Haynes is internationally recognized for his research and education with extensive experience in all aspects of genetic epidemiology, with a particular focus on data analytics and areas of interest that include numerous neurologic and ophthalmologic disorders. We're trying to get him to do more cancer, and I think that will come. And he's credited with locating more than 20 causal and 200 associated genetic loci of human disease. Dr. Haynes is well aware of the need for diversity in genetic sampling and takes a comprehensive view of its importance in data analytics regarding and recognizing that environmental and social impacts can inform genetic expression and biochemical and biomedical outcomes. He is a recipient of many large NIH grants, including a $14 million NIH grant termed the Collaborative for Alzheimer's Disease Research. And the goal of that large effort is to link genetic profile of individuals with and without Alzheimer's disease to potential therapeutics and to develop novel pathways that would lead to new treatments for Alzheimer's. For this and for related work, Dr. Haynes has received the CWRU Faculty Distinguished Research Award back in 2019. Welcome, Dr. Haynes, who will now tell us more about Dr. Cullen and her appointment as the Pardee Gerstacker Professor and what that means to his department. Dr. Haynes.
Well, thank you, Stan. I first would like to introduce Jenny Cullen, who has the James T. Pardee Carl A. Gerstacker Professorship in Cancer Research. Unlike what you just heard about Pete, Jenny hasn't been here quite as long, so I don't have as many embarrassing pictures. So I had to work a little bit differently. And I will, let's see, I will share my screen. There we go. So I really thought I'd take a slightly different approach to this. And Jenny was one of the more unusual faculty recruitments that we've had. She's a fantastic faculty. She is a delight to have in the department. She has really taken hold of all the activities that we do there. She jumped right in to help us teach a course. I mean, she'd had like 3 weeks to prepare for it. And it's been really, really great. But the recruitment itself was a little bit unusual. First off, her education, she has a BA in integrative biology, she got an MPH, and she got a PhD in epidemiology. And so that's not so unusual. That's the usual part of things. But after that, and after a couple of different activities, for the past 10 years, she's been at the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences, or USUHS, which I cannot for the life of me ever remember how to say. Trying to remember that sequence of letters is almost impossible, and I can say that with some experience because I have a collaborator who is doing a lot of the sequencing for us, who happens to be at USUHS, and it's just been a disaster every time I've had to try to say that. So, that is in itself a little bit unusual because I've, until a few years ago, I didn't even know it existed. That said, the first question I had was, well, where is this? And the next thing I heard was it was at the NSA campus. And my first thought with that was, well, National Security Agency, okay, which means that we've recruited somebody who's a spy and, you know, secretly working out all sorts of different things. And so that made me, you know, not worried, but I thought, oh, this is really great. We've got somebody who's really super cool. But then I discovered that NSA actually stands for the Naval Support Activity on the Bethesda campus. And where is that? Well, it's actually on the campus where Walter Reed Hospital is, and it's right across the street from NIH. So it turns out it's not quite so secret. However, in order to get there and actually visit anybody, you have to have a sponsor and you have to go through all these extra things to get there. So it is still a little bit of a security kind of thing. So now, as I said, she's a relatively recent recruit to Case Western Reserve University. The recruitment, I mean, she actually signed her letters very late in the year in December 2019, and she actually started here just after the holidays in January 2020. Now, what that means is that she really hadn't had a chance to find a place to live, to do anything like that. So her first office was actually in her home in Maryland, right? So that's where she had to start working. And then she started going back and forth a bit. And she had an office. We were able to give her an office on the 6th floor of the Wolstein Research Building on campus, which she would use from time to time while she was going back and forth. However, earlier this year, actually January of 2021, PQHS actually got kicked out of the 6th floor completely. And so her office actually had to move into the Robbins building, which is a different building on campus. And her office is now on the 2nd floor of the Robbins building. So she's already had sort of three offices to work with. Now, also remember that there was a certain thing that happened starting about March of 2020, the pandemic, which threw a lot of people out off kilter a bit. So eventually, she did find a place to live, and this is a picture. It's not actually of her place, but it's a picture from her place out in Bay Village, looking out over Lake Erie. It's a very, very nice place. But because of the pandemic, her office is at her new home there. And so there she is working most of the time from that office. So she's now been working in 4 different offices, and that's in just less than, in just about a year's time. I do, however, think that when we are able to come back on campus on a regular basis, she may not actually want to come back quite as often, because this is the kind of view that she gets from her, from her home and from her office. And so I also think that maybe one of the reasons why we actually were able to recruit her here is because it's just gorgeous in that part looking out over the lake. So I don't want to take any more time. I mean, Jenny, is the associate director for cancer population sciences. Obviously, population science is extremely important to us within the department, and it's an area that we truly want to grow. And I have to say that over the last year, Jenny has been a tremendous asset in helping us to grow a number of different population science projects. Grants are starting to come in, and it's just been a delight to have her. She is full of energy and just a delight to work with. And so with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Jenny so she can tell you more about her life and her passions.
Jonathan, thank you so much for that introduction. I'm very honored to be here tonight, and I'll have a few words back to you, but the most important is you say it as Usis. That's how it's pronounced. I'll remind you again. So I'm going to start with just a couple of slides to introduce those of you who don't know me to my professional expertise and background. Jonathan already shared some of the elements of my professional career. I did all of my training, my PhD and bachelor's at UC Berkeley. And when I was at Berkeley, I became very interested in understanding prostate cancer development and lethal progression. And in the last 10 years, while I was at USIS, and the Center for Prostate Disease Research, I spent a lot of time leveraging a large clinical repository linked to biospecimen data repository to try to understand and validate biomarkers and assays that can help prognosticate poor prostate cancer outcomes and help us allow patients to make better, more informed treatment decisions at earlier time nodes in the cancer continuum. I also spent a lot of years dedicated to collecting prospectively health-related quality of life data on our prostate cancer patients to better understand how treatment, invasive therapies cause declines and decrements in health-related quality of life. But with all of this work, and since my early training, even as a master's student, I've been very committed to the space of understanding cancer disparities along the entire continuum of cancer care, with consideration not only of biology, but social causes that are the underpinnings of these disparities. Among my career goals, it has been my interest to focus not only on risk factors of cancer occurrence, but predictors of more aggressively behaving cancer. And in that effort, I have come to appreciate the importance of building novel population-based cohorts, including cancer risk factor data, to not only examine its occurrence, but the outcomes we see. And in this work, to maintain a constant emphasis on promoting equity for all populations, especially the medically vulnerable. And I wouldn't be an epidemiologist if I didn't share some data from a longitudinal cohort study. These are slides, this slide and the next one, are data that are highlighted from a paper I'm submitting, examining longitudinal trends in metastatic prostate cancer at diagnosis. So patients who are newly diagnosed, whose disease has already spread regionally or distantly. And this was a study conducted over more than 27 years in a military cohort healthcare beneficiary population over the entire country, selected medical centers. And what you see in this graph are curves for those aged older or equal to 75 as compared to those under 75. The bottom curve are the younger patients. And what I want you to take away from this slide is that between 1990 roughly and 2007, we saw a steady decline in both age strata for metastatic disease at first diagnosis. And around the same time that the U.S. Preventative Services Task Force was debating the importance and the value of PSA screening, especially for older men, right around that same time that changes were made to recommendations such that we told older men to not be screened, we started to see a steady uptick in the incidence of newly diagnosed advanced disease in older men. Similarly, these data mirror the first slide in all regards, the study period, the cohort examined, and the examination of annual percent change in newly diagnosed advanced disease. In 1990, when the introduction of PSA screening for detection of prostate cancer began to be widely disseminated, especially within the military's healthcare system, we saw that at baseline, at the original year of PSA introduction, there were significant differences in the prevalence of advanced disease for African American men depicted in the upper curve versus Caucasian American men in the lower curve. And these differences began to disappear steadily over time, such that these curves became fairly superimposed by roughly 2007. And then after that time point, similar to the older patients, we start to see an uptick and a separation of the curve for African-American men. This is a very important finding for African-American men who not only have a twofold higher incidence of prostate cancer, but a 1.5-fold increased mortality of prostate cancer than their Caucasian counterparts. So I want to highlight just a few of my career and professional highlights, as I was asked to do. One of them was a very special opportunity to partner with a pharmaceutical company, Genomic Health, when they were trying to validate a 17 gene panel assay that they call Oncotype DX. They had one well established for breast cancer, and they were trying to establish one for prostate cancer to forecast bad outcomes. And they came to us to validate this work in our DoD military healthcare population. And sure enough, we published a paper in European Urology in 2015. And I was able to highlight that work at the 2014 ESMO meeting in Madrid, Spain, focusing on how the 17 gene panel assay was a useful prognosticator of men fated for disease progression after radical prostatectomy. I'm also very proud of the time I spent on Capitol Hill advocating for improved research and outcomes for children with cancer. And I'll talk about why I did that in just a moment. This work was very special to me, and the hard work of all the advocates who championed for this legislation known as the STAR Act, which is now public law. I also spent many years fundraising in Washington, D.C. for Children's National under the Children's Health Foundation. This is a hospital in D.C. that takes all comers for childhood diseases and for care without ability to pay. And it is a very special hospital to me, near and dear to my heart. And then finally, the other highlights of my career were clearly joining Case Western School of Medicine, as well as Jonathan's department, Dr. Haynes' department, and working for Stan as part of the executive committee for the Case Comprehensive Cancer Center. And finally, the penultimate moment would be this one. I'm very proud to be here tonight and very grateful. I do want to talk a little bit about those who put me on my journey, and it didn't take me more than a millisecond to think of who the appropriate people to acknowledge would be. My father, Joe Cullen, spent many years as a cancer researcher. In fact, cancer was really a topic of conversation at the dinner table growing up, which doesn't sound very happy or exciting, but he was an extremely inspirational person and saw the true value in public service. And I've been told over the years was really a truly inspirational leader in the workplace. And I was very aware of his high level of integrity, not only in his career, but in his personal life. My father spent over 7 years at the Johnson Comprehensive Cancer Center at UCLA, where he was deputy director, and then moved to the National Cancer Institute as deputy director of the Division of Cancer Prevention and Control, when it was still called that back in the 1980s. And much of his work was dedicated to trying to launch national level community intervention trials to prevent smoking uptake and tobacco use. And he partnered with public health figures in Australia, China, Japan, and all parts of Western Europe to really bring that work to a global level. His untimely death at the age of 53 was due to a brain tumor that he did not know he had. And his death really solidified my interest and my passion for a space with a career in cancer research of some kind. Flash forward to 2011, I would again have to face cancer diagnosis in family members. And I really learned through my daughter Alexandra's diagnosis with medulloblastoma, which is a pediatric brain tumor, the importance of always protecting the most vulnerable among us and prioritizing their healthcare needs above all others. And she has really served as a catalyst for me to never give up, even if moments of duress and stress and disillusionment with my career, if I've had such moments. And finally, I want to recognize the cancer patient advocates for all of the courage and perseverance they show, taking their time out of their busy lives to go to Capitol Hill and spend all day meeting with legislators, sometimes with deaf ears, fortunately, most often with listening ears. And actually, I have an odd tie to Dr. Scacheri, to Peter, in that the very first advocate I met was Ruth Hoffman, who is the wife of his colleague and mentor, Dr. Hoffman, who discovered the muscular dystrophy gene. I want to just end my remarks pointing out how I feel this professorship appointment will benefit my career and has already benefited me. There is an enhancement of one's work when you get an appointment like this, in that it protects your intellectual time and your funding. It also creates a platform for me to develop new academic and community level relationships to focus on health equity research, which is of the greatest interest to me. I am fairly new to Cleveland and I am still developing new relationships. And so this is of great value to me. And it serves as a great endorsement of respect and honor. And I take that very seriously. I have immense gratitude for Dr. Stan Gerson, for Dr. Jonathan Haynes. I truly respect them. They're in the caliber of leaders and those with integrity on the level that I saw my father. And I recognized that during my interview process. And it was one of the greatest motivators to coming here. also my new case colleagues. I can't name everyone I would like to name, but especially those I've met on the executive committee and in my department. You're very special to me, and I'm so glad and honored to be here. And I couldn't possibly leave out my family, my husband, Reggie, my son, Samuel, who were willing to take a huge gamble after 18 years of living in DC and 16 years in the same home. We picked up and moved during a pandemic, nonetheless. That was not planned, obviously, and took a gamble on a new chapter. And I think my son is very happy with baseball, travel baseball, and this summer will be another exciting opportunity for him to travel and play here for St. Ignatius in Ohio. And I'm very grateful for the sacrifices they've made so that I could have this opportunity. And for that, I'm very grateful. I love you, Reggie. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cullen, for a very moving and hugely impactful story of your career. And Dr. Scacheri, again, thank you for sharing your remarkable career. Now I know why we have endowed professorships. If anything, I know now it's now time, and it should have happened even earlier. So I think we can agree with these two examples that our endowed professors are really our pinnacles of light across the School of Medicine as our educators, scientists, scholars. We aim them to be a mark of honor, respect, and prestigious legacy, both for the recipient and for the donor. And it's my honor to be able to provide and bestow these professorships to Drs. Cullen and Scacheri, and I want to thank Dr. Wynja Boris and Dr. Haynes for their support of their selection. It reflects our gratitude again for your professional leadership, research endeavors, accomplishments, and are looking forward to your incredible opportunities to continue to contribute to the fabric of our medical and scientific and teaching communities here at the School of Medicine. Prior to tonight's event, actual chairs were delivered to Jenny and Pete. In a normal ceremony, I'd like you to have to sit down in them for the first time. So I hope each of you can settle into your chair so that the image can be shared. And as you find your way to your chair, I'll just reiterate that it's my privilege to present Dr. Pete Scacheri as the Gertrude Donnelly Hess MD Professor of Oncology Research. I think you're going to see the image of them sitting. And Dr. Jenny Cullen as the James T. Pardee Carl A. Gerstacker Professor of Cancer Research. And did we get the pictures? You bet. Look at that. Looks great. Now all I need is a better smile. And I get to raise a glass and toast of their accomplishments. And all of you at home, and don't drive, can enjoy dinner with the Scacheri and Cullen families. Next time we'll do it in person. And I again want to appreciate all of those involved in this evening's activity, but especially congratulations for well-earned respect and accomplishment to Jenny and Pete. And with that, good evening and thank you.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.